Hello, welcome everybody. This is our month, this July month, our Society of Simulation Healthcare System Modeling Simulation Affinity Group webinar. So I'm Adriano from Mayo Clinic. I'm a moderator for this session. So just give a bit of background of this group. This group was formed 4 years ago to explore simulation modeling application in medicine beyond the training. So we have been going to one of the largest affinity group. We have 2,000 members on the email list. Thank you so much for joining us. So today we have a webinar presented by Dr. Adriano Henney. He has a PhD in medicine with research interest in cardiovascular disease, and he has spent many years in industry and university as well. Then he created and headed a new department that focused on pathway mapping and modeling, which involved to establish the practice of system biology supporting projects in discovery and development. Dr. Henry has extensive experience in directing and managing the large complex team across disciplinary, culture, geographic boundaries, literally in the area of system biology and system medicine. Right now, he established the Avicenna Alliance for the Predictive Medicine, a not-profit organization that focuses on developing a policy framework supporting the use of in silico technology in medicine, and which is now his Secretary General. So welcome, Dr. Henry. Here you are. Thank you.
Thanks for the introduction, Yue. I hope you can all hear me okay. It's a very interesting invitation, and let me just start by saying I hope that this will be of interest to you. I mean, it's not going to be a technical presentation. This is very much about trying to influence and increase the awareness and promotion of the approaches of in silico medicine in healthcare more routinely than currently is being used. I've changed the title slightly to talk about building bridges to deliver predictive medicine, because I think we all know that over many years computational modeling and simulation has been used in pockets, sporadically, anecdotally, and it's never really got to prime time. And when I'm talking about modeling and simulation, I'm not referring particularly to the pharmacometric side of things. That's PK, PD, PBPK, the sorts of things that have been used for a very long time. But I'm talking about modeling physiology, modeling biological networks, things which are beyond the pharmacological component in modeling that has been used and is well established. So this is about building bridges to deliver these technologies to help us actually enable predictive medicine, and I'll try and explain why policy is really important in helping us to do that. So again, I don't know what the audience is here, and apologies if I'm actually, as we say in the UK, taking coals to Newcastle, if a lot of this you already know. But I think it's important for laying the groundwork, for laying the background so that we understand the logic of where we're going. We know that we are facing a status quo that is unsustainable in healthcare, largely because of the aging population. The fact that that aging population is riddled largely with a lot of chronic disease, where there's limited therapeutic options. Those that are there are not that great. They're not actually operating as well. This puts a huge burden on healthcare infrastructure. In the case of both financially in terms of cost and also in terms of manpower that is necessary to look after the elderly population that is not doing too well. In terms, somebody's got their mic on. Can I ask you to mute mics, please? In terms of the pharmaceutical company, the talk is predominantly focused on medicines, although it applies equally to devices and software and other areas, but I'll come back to that later. In terms of pharma and medicines, we know there's been a huge increase in the costs of producing innovative medicines. The time to market is increasing, and the business models are tending increasingly to segment away from one size fits all, to much more personalized delivery of medicines in the hope of making them much more efficacious. And to a certain extent, that's had limited success, and there's been an exponential increase in budgets in the medicines area. As I said, the aging population, this is a demographic which has come from the UN World Population Prospects. You can see it's growing, irrespective of which territory you're in. The estimate in Europe is that by 2030, 24% of the population is going to be over 65, and it's going to grow beyond that. And this is an unsustainable situation because the chronic, complex, multifactorial diseases that prevail in those populations are largely difficult to treat. These people have present with comorbidities, and polypharmacy is there. The current therapies have limited success, and that's led to an exponential increase in the costs of healthcare. These are statistics for the United Kingdom since 1949 to 2010, and an increase in gross domestic product over that period. This is an unsustainable figure. And what it's actually telling us is that actually we are victims of our own success in medicine, in that modern medicine has allowed us to turn what have been essentially acute illnesses with natural consequences into ones which become chronic and require long-term management. And that carries clearly a financial burden. In terms of pharma and in terms of medicines, we know that there are many late-stage drug failures. If you look at the overall trend in efficiency since 1950 to the last few years, this has come from a Nature Reviews Drug Discovery paper, the cost of the number of drugs per billion US dollar R&D spending has declined to less than 1. We know that various estimates are saying that it can cost anything up to $3 billion to produce a new medicine from soup to nuts, and those estimates vary. The interesting thing about this is that the late stage drug failures are the ones which are particularly crippling, and around phase 2 and phase 3, 45% of the R&D costs, around $1 billion, are lost if you fail in that. And that's why it's really important at that stage to start to being able to understand safety and efficacy. And even if you do get through and you have a product that gets to market, even then, one size does definitely not fit all. These are statistics on popular medicines showing the percentage of the patient population that in which the drug is ineffective. So in arthritis, 50% of the population are not benefiting from the drug. In cancer, 75% of the population for drugs that are delivered without a personalized profile, a generic, one drug to the community, it's not effective. And this is a bit of a sort of a question mark. Why is this the case? I mean, we've had such fantastic advances in medicine, such fantastic advances in technology and understanding or knowledge, information since the Genome Project. And I think one of the things that we should do is maybe think back to the 15th century, funnily enough, and Leonardo da Vinci, who, the Vitruvian Man is the painting here. He was an outstanding polymath. Not only was he an artist, he was an engineer, he was a mathematician. He had a genius in predicting machines in the 15th century that wouldn't actually be built until much later. And he also was well known for his anatomical approaches. He dissected bodies, he went down to their fine detail and described them in the greatest detail. Much as we've been doing at a molecular level today. I mean, we've been dissecting biology and physiology down to its molecular level, identifying the components in their greatest detail. But what Da Vinci recognized, and I think what perhaps we're not so good or haven't hitherto been that good at recognizing, is that once you do that, you're in danger of losing sight of the whole. And the important thing is, yeah, you can do that, but you've got to remember how to put those things back together again in the context of its function. So you need to be able to reassemble the components in a logical way that helps you understand function. And it's true. the body is a machine. We know it's a machine. We have all of the components that are reminiscent of a machine, the engine, communication, motion, computation, and control. It's there. It's self-organized. It's not built to a standard blueprint. The function that emerges, it emerges from dynamic network interactions. And understanding the complex system dynamics that underpins those functional network interactions requires computer modeling. Engineers know this for Ferraris or jumbo jets or whatever, but in biology and in medicine, we've been rather late in coming to that realization. And those complex interactions are those things that underpin complex multifactorial diseases. Those are the diseases which prevail in the aging population. These are not single hit phenomena. They may have significant genetic drivers, as in cancer, where the genetics in particular is a major component of the emerging phenotype, with the environmental impact having some impact, but not quite the same as in diseases where you have multiple genes of small effect and significant impact of the environmental or epigenetic areas. So if those diseases arise from maladaptations of the state of a system, then it follows that we've got to look at the system in order to try and bring it back to normality. So correction requires identification of the key control points that focus on normalizing the system response. And in order to do that, we need to understand the dynamics in computer modeling. None of this is new, and it's certainly not new to this audience, I'm sure. And it's been the subject of many papers and many publications. This is just one in PricewaterhouseCoopers report in 2008, where they made very, very clear statements that approaching this understanding how the body works at the molecular level and encompassing how pathophysiology underpins disease in the way that I've described, needs virtualization. And pharma industry need to increase the amount of virtualization they include as part of their pipelines if it's going to be achieved. The other thing that they emphasized quite clearly was that there was a need for greater collaboration between industry, academia, regulators, governments, and healthcare providers. I've underlined that because it's relevant to what I'm going to be talking about in a little bit further down the line. This isn't science fiction. You know it's not science fiction because you're understanding this area. It's achievable. These are a few snapshots. This is one particular one coming from a group in Sheffield in the UK, where they've used modeling and simulation to overcome a particular cardiovascular challenge, fractional flow reserve, which is typically an extremely, at least in the UK, very expensive, not easily found, complex invasive procedure. By creating a model that will supplement that, and it's been shown in a preliminary set of 20 patients that it predicts very, very well the virtual flow reserve in coronary angiography rather than undergoing complex invasive procedures. That's undergoing additional trials at the moment, but it's a very, very encouraging approach of modeling and simulation in a very critical clinical setting. In the pharmaceutical company, factor 10 inhibitors, now this is from Bayer, published in PLOS ONE, and they've used blood coagulation computer modeling based on several published models and preclinical data to look at efficacy and safety, the two things that are responsible predominantly for the largest late-stage failures in phase 2 and phase 3. And I've looked at the computer model of blood coagulation to be able to investigate this very successfully, and they've used this as part of the process for rivaroxaban approval. And they also used it to compare dosing schedules with the standard use of warfarin. This is in trauma. This is in, I think this was Science Translational Medicine from the group in Pittsburgh, where they clearly say that Their studies demonstrate the limitations of extrapolating from reductionist mechanisms to outcomes in individuals and populations, and demonstrates quite clearly the use of mechanistic simulation in complex diseases. Remember, we're talking about here modeling mechanisms of action, mechanistic interactions of signaling networks, other networks, physiological networks, not necessarily just the pharmacology side of things. So, and those were just 3 examples I picked out of the hat. I mean, there are many, many others, you know of many as well. So with all of these examples showing that modeling and simulation has a place in tackling some of the difficulties that we face in modern medicine, why is it that we need to build bridges to deliver predictive medicine, personalized medicine, whatever it is? Despite the evidence indicating that potential, uptake's still been relatively limited. I know for a fact that in companies, modeling and simulation is being used for, alongside decision making, but when it comes to actually prime time, part of the delivery of projects to regulators and have regulatory approval, it's still very much in its infancy, and I'll come back to that a bit later. Some of this has got to do, I think, very much with lack of confidence in silico models compared with other models. We use in vivo and in vitro models routinely all the time, and there's uncertainty associated with every model that you use. I think one of the big problems we faced is that within silico, with computational models, simply I think because of the largely because of the separation of disciplines from the mathematical and the biological disciplines, the confidence and understanding how computational models may be able to be used is lacking. So familiar uncertainty versus unfamiliar uncertainty, I think, is partially why it's not being adopted with greater enthusiasm. And then we have some regulatory hurdles around verification and validation of models and whether or not they can be used in regulatory submissions legitimately. And again, I'll come back to that later. Now, there is work going on in the regulatory agencies. Here are 3 snapshots of things that have come from Europe. The European Medicines Agency and the European Federation of Pharmaceutical Industry Associations have worked together looking at model-informed drug discovery and development. So there is work going on, and they're looking at how to do this. These are workshops and working groups that are looking at how this might be implemented. So it would be wrong to say that this is being ignored completely. It's not. There is work going on in working groups, in workshops, to explore this in detail. In the States, I would like to say, I think probably the FDA is leading the pack here, and this is coming from CDRH, the Center for Devices and Radiological Health at the FDA, where they've been looking at modeling and simulation for quite a while now, and are talking about computer models of virtual physiological patients, clinical trial simulations. They're already beginning to look at this and also consider creating virtual populations that would be relevant for regulatory purposes. And they also have a very clear strategy going forward, and I believe this is going across the different centers in the FDA, where they're talking about digital patients, again, virtual clinical trials, and using these approaches as technologies, as tools that would underpin the delivery of truly personalized medicines. In Europe, this is taken from the chair of the European Medicines Agency Modeling and Simulation Working Group, where it's very clear they're encouraging the use of quantitative modeling. They accept that everybody's on a learning curve here, and there is a need to share with regulators how this might be approached. And it's really, really important. It's not just a simple case of saying, you know, we've got lots of scientific papers out here showing that this can work. There's a question here that is necessary to be able to identify and be confident about scientific rigor and confidence in the predictions that are being used, if they're going to either supplement or replace trials or be forerunners for trials, which may be something for the future, especially if we're thinking of pediatric indications or rare diseases. There is an absolute need in improvements in model verification, validation, and uncertainty quantification. And this is something that needs to be going forward. So there is activity going on here in working groups that are exploring the things that need to be done. From the drug discovery and development perspective, the challenges are listed on this table. That the use and acceptance is unequal across regulatory authorities. Understanding is variable. Clinical reviewers may not be fully a bit conversant with these things, may be very difficult for them to review areas which they don't necessarily understand or don't understand the models that are being put forward. Expertise and understanding in this area is limited. So building skills and understanding going forward is going to be a critical element of where we go. And there's a real need now to move towards an understanding of real-world evidence and how that can be used to inform modeling and simulation. Because after all, once you get out of the highly sanitized and very selective clinical trial setting, you go into the real world where you won't find that trial anywhere. You will be meeting all sorts, and that's why you're getting variable efficacy in, as I showed in one of the earlier slides, going forward. So these are the real needs that need to be addressed alongside the regulators to be able to gain confidence and to position modeling and simulation in silico medicine appropriately in the modern context to address 21st century medicine challenges. One component of that is we're doing stuff in Europe, there's stuff just going on in the States, there's stuff going on in Japan, India. There is a need for a global approach to define good practice, I would say best practice, on the acceptance of modeling and simulation in the regulatory approval process. And why global? Because the businesses that are delivering medicines and devices and software in this area typically are not kitchen sink operations. They're global industries, big, major industries that operate across marketing territories. It's in their interest, it's in everybody's interest to try and make sure that there is an understanding across territories so that there is a reduction in the delay to delivery of market when you move from one territory to another, which we know can be a big financial and time constraint for these companies. So some of these things were put forward as the rationale for undertaking a project, a 2-year project, that was aimed at building confidence, trying to identify the route to validation, verification, and adoption, mapping out the opportunities, hurdles, gaps, and challenges that underpin this entire area. And this was called the Avicenna project. It was, as I say, it was called a strategy for in silico clinical trials, supported by the European Commission for 2 years, from 2013 to 2015, with some project partners. It's called in silico clinical trials, but actually it's more than that. The concepts of modeling and simulation in silico medicine span the entire value chain of these operations, from soup to nuts. So it's about the use of patient-specific computer modeling simulation applied in research and development of new biomedical products, as well as in their evaluation and assessment. So discovery, research, translation, clinical, preclinical, and actually post-marketing surveillance. Everywhere where there are complex questions which mathematical models can be applied to help interpret and put forward testable hypotheses is legitimate under the title in silico clinical trials in this context. The roadmap was published, I think it was about 18 months ago. It's available online. There were a total of 36 recommendations, which includes typically training and education. I've mentioned that. The business around validation and reliability, I've mentioned that. Interestingly, 3 R's, that is replacement, refinement, reduction, and replacement of animal testing. There's been a lot of information around that. There is great potential for modeling and simulation to streamline and enhance and complement not just in vivo assessments, but also in vitro to help streamline complex cell assays and the rest, and of course decision making. Interestingly enough, we also had a range of recommendations on policy which focus on the regulators and trying to get them to embrace computer modeling and simulation in a slightly different way than had been done hitherto. And as I said, you can get this online. But that was a project. It was 2 years, and as we know, with the end of a project, it's delivered, everything's done, it's all packaged up. What happens next? Where do you go next? Do you just put it on a shelf? Do you just let it gather dust? Where are you going to go? And this was a discussion that we had actually with the European Commission. And they asked those questions. They said, well, this was a very good project. We're very pleased with the output. What are you going to do now? And where's the project sustainability? And they actually challenged us to put together a public-private partnership. And in the last 6 months of the project, putting together a legal entity, which was a PPP that is rather complex, was a bit of a headache, bit of a challenge. But what we said was, what about if we go back, test the water with our industry contacts and see what appetite there is to do this going forward, which we did, and there was an appetite to create something that would take this on and continue the momentum. But instead of a very legally complex public-private partnership, we suggested that we produce an alliance, a not-for-profit organization as an alliance, which would focus as a partnership between healthcare industries, that is pharma, devices, software, potentially cosmetics as well, even insurance companies that have an interest in using in silico approaches. And it was established by the European Commission. They specifically asked us to do this because they, as you'll see in a minute, need to have input and expert guidance on some of the areas where there is limited understanding and limited knowledge. The academic side comes from the Virtual Physiological Human Institute, of which I was executive director until end of 2015, which again is another not-for-profit with global reach. That was one of the partners in the roadmap that I just mentioned, and which has a long history of funding from the European Commission. It has members from Mississippi and other places in the States through to New Zealand and lots in Europe, obviously, as well, and Singapore. The purpose for this was to have a partnership, one-to-one partnership between academia and industry in addressing the regulatory barriers that exist in silico medicine and to help develop policies on in silico medicine, directly linking the healthcare industries with the expert researchers in the VPH Institute and elsewhere to help advance the field. At this point, I just mentioned this is going back to dear old Da Vinci, where we're paying homage to him by designing the new symbol for the association, forging a new path in EU policy on in silico medicine. We're paying tribute to Da Vinci's thinking, but adding to it the concept of circuits as a metaphor for the physiological networks that we need to study, understand, and simulate. So Da Vinci's alive and kicking within the logo, as you can see in the top right-hand corner of the Avicenna Alliance. Now, it may not be obvious to everybody why policy and why we should care about policy and why policy matters, especially to, I guess, to academics in particular. But I want to try and demonstrate this, and I'm pitching this slide from my colleague James Kennedy in Road Public Policy, our partners in Brussels, and hopefully help you to understand that project investments in industry and in research do not occur in a policy vacuum. So I'm going to break this down into how policy can create micro threats, micro opportunities, and how policy can create entirely new markets altogether. So for a micro threat, in 1989, in the USA, a few companies heard that the Environmental Protection Agency was about to introduce new legislation that could damage their business. These companies diversified their product pipeline, sourced alternatives, and adapted. And for every company that was paying attention to policy, there were 2 or more who weren't. And they got a real shock when the EPA banned the use of asbestos insulation, and almost every specialist company went under, and those that planned for the future continued to thrive. That's a micro threat. That's an example of where policy can have an impact. This is an interesting one in terms of a micro opportunity, and it goes back actually to around about 1938-39, just before the war, where a guy called Percy Shaw in the UK, in response to the imminent air raids and blackouts appearing, anticipated that there were going to be some real problems, because with the blackouts, without the street lighting, there was going to be an increase in motor traffic accidents, and there would need to be a solution. And that's exactly what happened. The government went into a tailspin. They didn't really understand what to do. And then he turns up and said, well, I've got this little invention. We call it a cat's eye. And the government loved it so much, they implemented legislation that mandated that this should be used routinely, and it is still in existence today. And the guy made an absolute fortune from a company because he spotted a micro opportunity, responded and prepared, and was ready to go for when it hit the ground running. And finally, global market shifts. Policies have the potential to drastically change entire global markets and change everything that you know about your business. For example, wind turbines here. If you tried to sell one of these things about 30 or 35 years ago, you wouldn't have got anywhere. But when the legislation for renewable energy targets and climate change policies came in, clearly there's a need to do that. And that's why this kind of sector flourished, ready to go, as a result of policy shifts that mandated the need for something completely different. And these are examples, maybe good or not, I don't know whether you think they're particularly appropriate, but they demonstrate how research investment is not done in a policy vacuum. Policy has a direct impact on everything that we do going forward. And that's why we're focusing on policy, and a little bit more about that in a minute. We're called the Association Predictive Medicine, and in our definition, predictive medicine, or in silico medicine, is the use of computer modeling and simulation in the diagnosis, treatment, or prevention of a disease. It contributes to advancing personalized medicine through the use of big data, turning raw data into actionable information that can inform decision-making in healthcare. Okay, the Alliance is made up of 50-50 healthcare industries, as I said before, and academics. At board level, it's a one-to-one voting. We have 3 working groups around policy development, research, obviously, and international affairs. The international affairs is particularly focused on working from the start at aligning and harmonizing the approaches to doing this across marketing territories, and I'll mention a bit more about that in a moment. The vision is that we will become the go-to organization that will help to develop this framework for in silico models, having international guidelines which will be adapted in different regulatory networks, encouraging policymakers to learn from the past and move forward, and to become a forum for industries, researchers, and regulators around the world to discuss how in silico medicine can be applied effectively to tackle healthcare problems. We've only been going a year, actually just over a year. We started in April of 2016, but in that time we've had some successes. In Europe, these are successes in Europe where we have been instrumental in including text in the medical devices regulation that specifically mentions the use of computer models and alongside other modeling. And it requires that where appropriate, the results of biophysical or modeling research whose validity has been demonstrated needs to be taken into account. We have also had a similar success in the European Parliament on the European Medicines Agency regulation, where for the first time the recognition and evaluation of modeling and simulation technologies is being called for, and again, alongside other models, other cellular models, human relevant computer models, they're being called for to be used as part of an assessment routinely for medicines going forward. These are two significant events that have happened through a lot of discussion and working together with the Commission and our parliamentary colleagues to help get these texts on the agenda. In the US, in parallel, we haven't had an influence on this, but I do know that the Virtual Physiological Human Institute members from Mississippi, I think, have been involved in working with the United States Congress and the US Senate Appropriations team in helping to get in silico on the table, and in this particular bill, I think that was actually approved in May of this year, finally. So very clearly you can see the text there, that's taken from Title 6 of the bill, explicitly mentions where appropriate in silico trials should be used for advancing new devices and drug therapy applications. The FDA now is showing this as their 4 pillars of testing, so computer modeling is now alongside animal and bench modeling and human studies in the assessment of safety and efficacy. So things are beginning to move forward. In the last few months, we've been very active in working across the Atlantic with our colleagues at the FDA. They joined us in our launch, our formal launch in the European Parliament in October. Tina Morrison from CDRH came, and you can see her in this picture, where she's clearly saying that there's a developing collaboration towards harmonization, not just alignment, but a desire to harmonize between the US and EU on in silico medicine. We've signed subsequently a memorandum in May at our visit to Washington, D.C., which now means that the FDA have an observer status as members of the Alliance. We are working with them very closely to deliver precisely that, as outlined in our Memorandum of Understanding. We were also very fortunate to be invited by the chair of the Senate Appropriations Committee, Thad Cochran, to spend half a day with him and his team in the Senate in May, where we came out with an informal agreement to ensure that contacts between Brussels, between the policymakers in Europe and in the States are aware of the discussions that are going on to underpin the concept of harmonization across the US. And finally, Scott Gottlieb, the new Commissioner for Food and Drugs, in his speech at the FDA Science Forum, specifically focused on CDRH, what they're doing in collaboration with members of academia and the device industry to develop novel methods to create models of virtual patient outcomes, leveraging prior clinical data, etc., etc., etc. So it's very firmly now on the agenda, and it's underpinned by policy from the policymakers in government, both in the US and in Europe. And it's going to get worse. With big data, with the data that's coming out now from wearables and the like, there is going to be a tsunami of data that needs to be managed and interpreted to derive maximum benefit to the individual. Now, you and I know that, like crude oil, raw data needs to be processed before it can be used. And we believe very strongly that computer modeling has a key role to play in turning big data into that actionable information. Furthermore, it's entirely feasible that with the right devices, with the right wearables, with the appropriate quantitative data that can be collected from them, this can be information that can feed the creation of new, simple, usable computer models that can be used by non-experts. This is looking to the future. This is like looking at the opportunity. This is a bit like the wind, the windmills. You know, we know that this is coming. Let's get ourselves ready to actually drive that forward. This is what we're talking about. The difficulty is that technology is moving ahead so fast that policy, by an oversight by comparison is like a horse and cart plodding along behind, and they are completely at different timescales. So there's a need now for us to have policies and regulations being evolved as the technology is being evaluated and applied, so that together we can understand how optimally it can be applied for the benefit of the patient ultimately. And these are areas where quite clearly there are legitimate questions for which regulations or policy is either scant or absent. So coming towards the end here now, in a nutshell, the time is now right. It's imperative that industry and academia work together. The people that are at the cutting edge of these technologies, but working with stakeholders, including patients and ethicists elsewhere, to inform policy development alongside emerging technology. We've got to focus on providing the right kind of input so that that can evolve. We're doing a lot in Europe. We will be helping with the FDA to try and make sure that's harmonized across the pond. We now need also to reach out to Japan. We've had contacts from Brazil and also from Korea. They need to be explored, and with the help of our regulators in Europe and the FDA, hopefully we can get those regulators on board as well. We need to provide expert input to consultations at governmental level, and providing the evidence to build confidence in the technology. In other words, helping to address that unfamiliar uncertainty question I talked about before. And we need to work with the regulators to validate and eventually adopt broader use of the in silico technologies. So we're working towards a digital twin where we're moving from a reactive situation to one which becomes truly predictive, with the support of the toolbox that includes modeling and simulation alongside the other tools that exist. That we use it routinely to help refine and sharpen our decision support. That we get to a point where we begin to test far more in silico, and then we confirm the output of the predictions from in silico in vivo in much, much better refined studies, whether that's in animals or indeed in human subjects. We believe that we have here the emergence of a framework to build much greater confidence, and it's founded on policy at the foot of the triangle. So for us, policy underpins all of this, because with a policy that says we need this to happen, we are here, we're hungry for this to happen, that will stimulate the research to happen in that context. Out of that research will emerge that which is necessary to validate these things better, and with that validation comes adoption. But in the absence of policy and in the absence of a raison d'etre for companies and others really to make the investment that's necessary in research, that isn't going to happen. And ultimately, this is why we're beginning to have some traction now, is that policy is demanding that this has got to happen in the future. And in the Alliance, we've got, as I said, academia and industry. We now have regulators informally in Europe with the European Medicines Agency, but formally with the FDA. And we now have patients and clinicians, also ethicists, on board with our association with the European Forum on Good Clinical Practice. And ethics are going to be really important here, because as it becomes known that modeling and simulation can help, let's say, in pediatric indications or in rare diseases, you can ask the ethical question, when does it become unethical not to apply a toolbox that you know could help to address a critical need? And these are things that we'll be picking up in some of our webinars and seminars with the European Forum on Good Clinical Practice in the coming months, especially in next year. These are some of the people and some of the companies that are a part of it. We've got Johnson & Johnson in particular. That is at corporate level. This is at global corporate level, that brings in pharma, devices, and healthcare products. Boston Scientific, ANSYS for software, Edwards, you can see these, and our key academic partners from Auckland, from Norway, from the UK, from Spain, Ireland. You can see the kind of membership that we're beginning. We've only been going a year, and membership is now starting to grow. Thank you very much indeed.
So thank you, Dr. Henney, for the presentation. So we will leave some time for the questions. We have a question from the audience here. So besides clinical expertise, what other expertise disciplines are required to perform computer modeling? System engineers, design thinkers, human factor engineers.
And certainly, I mean, I think this is a great question, and this is a multidisciplinary approach. And certainly, when I set up systems biology in AstraZeneca back in 2000 or 2001 or whatever it was, I had mathematicians, physicists, engineers, as well as bench scientists and in vivo scientists as part of my department. And I think that all of those skills are necessary. What's particularly challenging is that typically those skill groups don't normally sit in the same room, simply because biology and physical sciences, physical mathematical sciences and biological sciences, certainly in the UK and in Europe, tend to diverge, and they don't tend to operate in an interdisciplinary way. We did a lot of this in the virtual liver network, which I headed in Germany for 5 years. There is an absolute need for an understanding that multiple skills groups need to be brought together in order to address the challenges. Specifically, depends on the question. What question are you asking will dictate what skill grouping you're going to need to have in place. But one of the most fundamental things in terms of training and expertise is that there needs to be an appreciation of disciplines that are absent from your current particular career path. So for me, I gave up maths at the age of 14, but I can understand that it's absolutely critical here, and appreciate that mathematicians and physicists need to be part of this in order to make it happen.
Yeah, I agree, Andrew. You know, this is really amazing because same thing for our work here. So we found, you know, we are lacking of those basic understanding for those approaches, because medicine have different paths, you know, from the college. You know, I think we need to regain those alignment from the education level. I think they mentioned about that in the training education arena. Thank you.
Yeah.
I also have a question for you. So
yeah.
I think, you know, you mentioned a lot last 10, 15 years, technology advanced so much, but we haven't really appreciated how much those computer power can enable us to do a lot of amazing things we never imagined before. So can you explain that a little bit further, because how powerful these days computer modeling can do beyond our imagination?
Well, I can't, because I'm not a computer scientist, but I mean, it's blindingly obvious. I mean, I think I think we've just got to encourage ourselves to really do some horizon scanning and understand what potential there is. If we go back to the Human Genome Project in its outset, we didn't have DNA sequencers. We didn't have a lot of the equipment and technology that has blossomed, exploded on the back of the Genome Program. And the reason for that, in my view, a lot of it was that there was a demand. That the demand and the timeline of the engineering project that was the Human Genome Project, the demand that created for its delivery necessitated the design and delivery of new tools to make it happen. So sitting here right now, you can say, well, we can do so much, but we can't do that. Okay, for example, let's say the wearables. Well, you can't use a wearable to create a model. How do you know? If you have something, if you have an Apple Watch, for example, I'm an Apple man, so apologies for other wearables. If you have an Apple Watch on you, if you have the right kind of sensors in there, what can they measure? What measurements do you need to make? What measurements, what sensors can you put in there that will deliver quantitative data that can then be captured in the watch in appropriately created models that will say, okay, this is going to be good or bad for you, this is what you should be doing, beyond the lifestyle stuff that's being done at the moment. I think that's just the tip of the iceberg. But if you look at where in silico, true in silico, the computational power that can be delivered, I think the opportunities for the future are huge, provided we ask the right questions and we focus to deliver that which is important. So the opportunity is there.
Yeah, thank you. That's I think that's great discussion. Thank you so much. Anyone else have some questions for Dr. Henney?
So, silence.
Well, people are thinking, I think this is because those are relatively new concepts for a lot of us,
Absolutely.
And a lot of our audience, I think, assume is from the Society of Simulation, Society or SSH, Society of Simulation Healthcare, which traditionally using simulation primarily using for improving skills for providers, teamworks, using mannequins particularly. There's a two level of the complexity. The first level, we shift away from the focus just for provider or team to look at the whole healthcare system, no matter it's a biology system or hospital operation or the policy. Second level, we move away from the physical simulators to the computer modeling, basically constructive simulation, so which is much more powerful, much more dynamic. For example, I was been told in the automobile industries, they have computer modeling to understanding aerodynamic of the car or airplane by 30 or 40 or 30 or 40,000 variables. So that for us, we're doing clinical trial, maybe have more than 10 variables we can manage. That's for the traditional approach. So I think that's we will try to see how we can leverage those technologies or approach to helping resolve our challenges.
It's absolutely right, Yue. I mean, I think that one of the partners, ANSYS, has a long history in aeronautics and in automotive modeling and simulation. They work very closely with Ferrari and are actually modeling a lot of stuff to do with bicycle racing in the Tour de France at the moment. So, but they recognize that those skills can be applied to tackle the complexity in healthcare, as I described, and they are one of the founding members of the alliance, extremely keen to adapt the software to help explain, and they've had some real successes in their market. So, what you say is absolutely right.
Yeah. So I think that's exactly the purpose for us. For this group, try to bring those expertise from other industries to coming to talk, what the challenges we have and what technology capability they have. Let's see how we can find the solutions, can link us together. So you see on the screens right now, I just post on the SH forum. We will have 2018 before MSH just designed for this particular mission, try to bridge the community between academia, engineering, management, and the policymakers, government agencies, see how the potential modeling simulation application can be improving safety quality beyond just training education. So I think we are still in the early stage or infancy of the growth of this industry or healthcare modeling simulation industry. I think we want people more and more come and join us or learn each other.
Well, I mean, yeah, and you very kindly invited me to come and talk at that. And again, if we can get the funding to help me get out there, because it's not cheap to get to LA, I would be delighted to come and give a similar presentation.
Yeah, we will work working with you very closely to see what's going to make it happen. So, yes.
Okay. There's a question from Gary Ann there. Thank you very much, Gary, for your compliments. Could you comment on the difference between the discovery phase for method development and those more mature applications that are amenable to engineering principle? Well, I'd say that, I'm not entirely sure, Gary, what you're saying, but I think that from my perspective, are you online, Gary? Do you want to verbalize that? You got your microphone on.
Yeah, I am online. Yeah,
Hi,
can
Gary.
you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Yes, okay, here.
Yeah, great.
Gary, would you mind introduce yourself first before you ask questions? Gary?
Yeah. So my name is Gary Ahn. I'm a surgeon and computational biologist at the University of Chicago. I had the honor of at least attending some of the Avicenna meetings and hearing Adriano speak in the past. So I think this is a great subject and a great speaker to talk about the applications of systems thinking and computational engineering principles to problems in biomedicine. I think one of the challenges, though, for people who are coming into biomedical arena is just how little understanding we have about the fundamental processes that are present in some of these biological systems. So the in certain application spaces, engineering principles where fundamental laws are known and are identified, these are extraordinarily powerful tools to make that translational leap and inform regulatory policy decisions at that level. But there's just so much about how we don't even know how biology works, for which modeling and simulation and computational analysis can be very beneficial, but it's almost like a separate epistemic task, right? Where the degree of uncertainty and beyond just the uncertainty associated with models themselves, but uncertainty with respect to what the underlying processes are and how they fit together are present. And so on one hand, I would be cautious about what the promise might be at a fundamental understanding point for the role of modeling simulation, which is important, but is nowhere near mature enough with respect to some of the potential expectations from policy or regulatory people. And so I would just like to hear what you think about, one, that idea, and two, how you think we might be appropriately cautionary when we talk to people who are not necessarily aware of that.
This is really, really important stuff, Gary. Thank you for bringing that up. I think let me just go back a little bit. I mean, what you're alluding to is the potential for hype, and this is something I'm on the record back into in a talk I gave in the presence of Lee Hood at the European Molecular Biology Laboratory in 2008, I think it was, where I said that the greatest disservice that systems biology could do to itself is if there is hype which overpromises and underdelivers. And I think that to a certain extent some of the difficulties we're facing with modeling simulation is that there was an element of that happened, and it's made things particularly difficult because people just don't believe it. They say, I know I've had people say, this has been going on for years, you've delivered absolutely nothing, you've promised the earth and there's nothing there. So that's one thing that needs to be understood. I think that there is undoubtedly opportunity. The way that we fill the gaps and we address those things, those challenges, those, I guess, the two sides of the coin as you presented them, is to work with the regulators. They admit that they haven't got validation, verification, and uncertainty qualification absolutely right so that they can adopt this right now. They know that. Their demands are actually pretty measured. They're actually quite cautious, but with the workshops and the working groups that they've put together, they're beginning to address those things and trying to put things into context. As you well know, it's a lot of this and how effective it can be is dependent on the nature of the question that's being asked. And the better refined that question, the better you're going to be able to position the toolbox. And it is a toolbox. It's not black science. It's not. These are mathematical tools that need to be adapted from areas where they've been used routinely in engineering to the engineering of the human body. And the positioning of the questions, the articulation of the questions is going to be absolutely critical in making that happen. There are things you can do. We had, in AZ, we had specific questions relating to, let's say, for example, a combination therapy between a small molecule and an antibody. How are they going to, what's the dosing schedule going to be like in this particular cytokine network in rheumatoid arthritis? We didn't have a model, but within 2 months, the essential cytokine interactions of the interacting network that underpinned this particular phenomenon were put together, and the model was asked the optimal dose, and we delivered that. The chances were that particular model was no use ever again, but it was specifically designed, fit for purpose, to answer a particular question. This isn't about making a single model of a human. This is about applying the principles in an intelligent way to address complex questions. And I think that can be done. And in some areas it can't be done. And we've got to be absolutely honest in saying that can't be done right now, but let's see how we can look at it going forward in the future. It's not mature enough. The maturity will come as we work together with teams in teams that until relatively recently haven't existed. We've been operating in academic and small silos in a vacuum, trying to persuade people to buy our snake oil, as they would see it. But actually, we're now beginning, as you've seen from the slides, hopefully, there are people actually beginning to get around the table that are really committed to make this happen. And I think out of that will come the solutions to some of the questions that you're raising. It's a bit of a rambling answer, Gary, but hopefully I've addressed it.
No, great answer. Thanks.
There's a question here from Noraliza Salazar. Thank you again for your comments. I will send you PDFs of the slides for you to use. I've also sent him a couple of pamphlets about the Alliance, which I'm happy for him to circulate for you to look at in greater detail. And of course, you have my coordinates. I would welcome anybody getting in touch with me as necessary.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Henney, to the presentation. We will also have this video recording on our YouTube channel. So Ashley, would you mind to show next slides? We have a URL for the our YouTube channel, so people can go there, see there's a, yeah, so Ashley, and then she'll present that the URL to you. So we have that video up there in a week or so, and also you can have other video from previous sessions by the great speakers there as well. So hopefully you can have a chance to watch those. And again, this is, please book your calendar for the January 12 to 13, 2018. So hopefully you can be with us.
You got out with the begging bowl, have you?
Yes, yes. So I think it will be exciting time for all of us to chat more about these topics. I think it's an exciting time. So hope all of you can join us. You know, then this is end of our presentation today. Thank you for all attending. Thank you, Dr. Henney, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you very much indeed. I enjoyed it, and thank you for your questions and for all of you enduring something which is probably a bit different from what you normally had. But have a good day.
Okay, bye-bye.